Hey, so with this video, I want to go over how to do basic sampling with Waveform 13. Waveform 13 is free music software that, for what it is really functional. Its only main problem, in my opinion, is that it just doesn't come with quite enough stuff. Mainly, it doesn't come with enough instruments. So if you click over here, you'll notice there are only 4 instruments. And there's not really any way to sample with the base instruments that come with Waveform. And even if there was, it probably still wouldn't be very good. I have been using the software for a while called TX16Wx. It's free. It's a VST that will install and be really easy to hook into Waveform 13. But it will allow you to take samples and do a couple things with them. So if you drag and drop this VST here, the plugin, right, into this track, it'll pull up with an interface that looks like this. There's a lot going on here, but we're going to try and focus on just a couple of the kind of most basic things you can do with it today. So something that I actually want to mention that's just really important for sampling, you want to organize your samples. How you do that, is kind of up to you. But what I really recommend is creating a folder in your C drive. 1, because it'll make it easier to access, but 2, and I've ran into this problem several times, when you change to a new computer, if you put your samples into something like your users folder, if that file architecture is not exactly the same when you set up your new computer, you'll have to point to where each sample is to reuse any of your tracks in a new computer. So putting them in the C drive is a great idea, just right in the root of it, because then 1, it's easy to access, and 2, it'll be easier to transfer over to a new computer. So here is my samples folder. You notice I have a couple things in here. I have these things called one-shots, and this little folder that says chop and slice. There's not a lot in these folders, and I downloaded all of the samples in here from websites that have free samples. I'll pull those over here. There are 2 websites that I like. This one doesn't have quite as much stuff going on here, Sampletopia, but there's some cool stuff to play around with on here, and it's all totally free. And then there's also Music Writer. Music Writer has a ton of stuff. It can be kind of hard to sift through because there's almost too much stuff, but once again, also totally free. I really recommend them because most sample websites will require you to set up an account, to use some sort of weird gamified token system, or just outright pay for samples. But there are at least 2 decent options, in my opinion, for finding free samples. And the other thing you can do, you don't actually have to download samples from somewhere else. You can make a sample out of anything. You can take field recordings, which is something I really like to do, where you go out and record whatever you want to, like, I don't know, bird sounds, or the sound of, like, the freeway going by, or, like, I don't know, just the city noise at night. You can find interesting sounds anywhere. You can take, like, household objects, like pots and pans, and hit them. I've used, like, the creaking of my desk chair in one of my songs before. There's a lot of places to find samples. Also, your voice is an instrument, and it's a great way to make lots of little samples, and you'll actually hear this in songs that people will use their voice and just say something like, hey, but then when they use it in the track, you'll be like, hey, 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 hey. That's the chopping and slicing method that we'll talk about in a second. Let's start out first, though, with how to take a sound and turn it into an instrument, or a synthesizer. If you go into my whatever samples you have, you'll see mine are in this one-shots folder. One-shots are great because they're really easy to set up and make an instrument with, because they are a single sound. And we'll try, I don't know, one of these sounds here, maybe. Oh no, I just want to listen to it first. Sorry. Find one that doesn't sound too terrible, hopefully. I don't think I like any of those. Whoa. Yeah, let's do that. That's like a chiptune sound there. So, if you drop it into here, you'll notice that this one shot gets put onto one key, which isn't very helpful. That gives us one noise we can make. I mean, if that's all you want to do is this one noise, you could. But that's probably not what you're going to want to do. So, you're going to want to take your sample in this little scroll here of the keyboard and stretch it out. You can stretch it all the way across if you want to, but the bigger you stretch it, the more notes there will be. And, if you just want as many notes as possible, you can stretch all the way to the side there. But I don't know, let's take a little smaller range. Let's go up to C6. So that's great. Now we have more things, but you'll notice these are all still just one single note, which really isn't that helpful. What you need to do once you've scrolled out here to multiple notes is set a root note. Now, something that's really important when setting a root note, sorry if I just disappeared, I had to dip down while I was talking. You need to figure out what pitch you're hearing. There are a couple ways to do this. You can pull up a tuner on my phone that I use for this all the time, or you can try and match with the pitch on your keyboard. I've got my little Akai MPK Mini that I use at my desk here. I've got a bigger Roland Juno across the room that if I'm doing something a little more serious with my keyboard that I'll use. But cool. That sounds like an A, but that's not that A. Might be that one. Yeah, I think it is that one. So that would be A3, I believe. So setting the root note to the right letter is really important, largely because if you do not, when you go to try and put this together with other sounds later on, you're going to have a really hard time keeping them all in the same key because you will have modulated the key that this instrument is in, right? It'll be a modulating instrument if you don't set it to the correct root note, because it'll be playing a different note than you're actually playing. So let's set this to A3. Boom. Now we've got that sound stretched out through multiple pitches. And that gives us a lot of options of what we can do with this now, right? We can create a melody using our little synthesizer here. We can also make chords with this, although this sound is not going to be great for chords. This will definitely be more of like a little melody noise here. Cool. So the other thing that we can do here, if we open up our waves up here, you'll notice here there's this little clicks up here. We're not going to talk about any other thing up here besides this waves section today. If you click on waves here, it'll pull up the actual sound, right? This is what we're using. And you'll notice if you play it, you'll see a little red line scroll across here. There are a few things we can do in here, but what we're going to talk about today is how to loop this, because the other thing that can be really useful here is you can loop a sound. Looping a sound in a sampler like this allows you to continue the noise. So you notice when we played it before there, it just kind of played through and it eventually stopped. As you'll see over here, there's a decay to the sound to where it eventually becomes silent, right? If you loop something like this though, and you want to try and take a loop that doesn't have too much crazy change in volume or, you know, an attack like this at the start of it here, because you'll get kind of a clipping noise if you do that. If you take a loop like this, you'll notice, right, I go right click, loop, new loop, right? It'll pop up over here in this range, boop, and sustain thing. If you set both of these to that loop, once again, those chords do not sound very good here, you'll get to have a synthesizer or, you know, a sampled sound now that'll play for longer than it's actually kind of sounded like some crazy noises on the higher end there. Cool. So that is kind of the most basic things we can do here, right? To make our own instrument. You want to drop in a sound, right, from your samples library. Make sure that's organized. Once you do drop a sound, you can set the root note to it. Well, actually, sorry, you can expand it here, because if you drop one sound, it's going to look like this, right? Just one single thing. You can expand it so that you have more of a range of notes to play through, right? And then you can also loop that sound, right? So if you loop over here, you set the range and the sustain to that new loop, it will sustain your pitch, as opposed to if we turn these off, we get just that one attack, right, as it decays out. Cool. Let's keep this thing looped. I kind of like the way this sounds looped. I think it'll be cool to do something with. Okay, cool. Then the other thing that we can do, the two most kind of basic options for sampling something, we'll drop this into a new track here. We can do what is called chopping or slicing. That's where we're going to take a longer sound, usually. This could be a song, or we're going to play around with something kind of weird today. I've used all kinds of different sounds for this. This can be just like people like talking at a party. It can really be anything, but you're going to take a longer chunk of something here. And you'll notice here I have a folder called Chop and Slice. We're going to use this thing, it says bird calls, just as an example. This probably wouldn't be something I would actually, you know, be using like regularly, but I have used bird calls in my music before, but I don't even know what this one totally sounds like because I just downloaded as an example for this video. If you go in here and you drop it again, right, you'll notice that this, since it's a longer sound, covers our entire keyboard. And that right now, we have nothing happening when we go to play it. So we're going to go to waves, because when we have a longer sample like this, we are going to need to slice it, right? So if you look over here, there's a section that says slice, and then it says slice/beat. We're just going to look at these two little things right here for today. So if we go to the number of slices, and I threw my keyboard on the ground earlier to put the MIDI synthesizer up here, and we change this to, I don't know, let's try 50. That is going to give us 50 little sections, right, of music here, right? But what we'll need to do when we do this so that it actually plays these sounds is we're going to right-click Slice and go to Layout Slices. If you don't do that, nothing is going to happen up here, okay? But if you go to Slice, Layout Slice, you'll notice now we have all 50 of these options from C4 up to C8 here. And that can be great. Sometimes you'll slice something like this and that'll really work well, especially if it's set up at the same tempo as what you're working with, like a song or something. Because it'll just slice, you know, individual beats or measures or whatever it is that you want to use. But we have a more kind of ambiguous sound like this. What we're probably going to want to do is take these little slices and just clip them into, you know, more specific little spots so that we actually have the sounds that we want and maybe not like a bunch of noises or dead space or things that we don't want. So I'll just clip a few of these as an example, because once again, this is not going to be perfect. Don't expect this to sound like, I don't know, top 40s music or something. But this is kind of the basics of how we get started with this, right? You're going to slice some little sections. And then once you have a few slices here, you want to make sure you're on the right range with your MIDI keyboard, which I actually am. Oh, whoa, that one is in a weird spot there. What happened with that? Oh, that's a cool one. Maybe a couple more than this. I want to give myself maybe like an octave of options here. What about this kind of quieter sound, maybe? Yeah, so maybe we get ourselves like an octave of little bird sounds here, and that's probably enough to start out for today. No, I want this side of this. Why are you? No, okay, there we go. Yeah, this one's way far away from anything here. Put that over there. That should hopefully be bad enough. That's probably an octave or so. Yeah, one note away from an octave. That'll work. Okay, cool. So now we have our little slices, right? Oh, that one's kind of cool. Yeah, so let's go back to our track now. And if you've watched any of my other videos, I probably talked about this before, but there are a few ways to get started with, you know, kind of having kind of a basis for your recording. You can have your metronome turned on. You'll see the metronome is this little thing down here. Looks like a little metronome, right? Enables the metronome click. I personally am not a big fan of metronomes. I find it much easier to play along with some kind of drum beat. There are a bunch of pre-made drum beats in this software. If you go over here, we're just using it as an example today. It's not going to, once again, be perfect, but, you know, it'll be something to start out with. Yeah, oh, that's kind of cool. Okay. And then we're going to take this and copy and paste and copy and paste a couple times here just so we have some space to kind of record into to get started with something. Alright, maybe one more. Cool. And then you'll notice that there's a little, it wasn't the right spot. There's a little error thing over here. Caution. This track has MIDI files, but it doesn't have an instrument over here. So if we go back to plugins, there are a couple of built-in drum options with this. There's the micro drum and there's also the rompler. I think the rompler is the easiest to use to get started out, especially if you're using this as more of a metronome and not as something you're hoping to actually have in your final track. And let's just try the micro 909. Sure. So we double click this and now we'll have sound a little different because that Micro 909 is not the same drum samples as the clip we looked at originally. Sounds good enough, right? That'll be our little basis just to get started playing around with something here. So now we'll go back to these other tracks. And this is really important when you want to record in something like this. If it's not already armed, make sure you turn this little red circle red, white, and the rest of this little box red. That'll arm your track. If that's armed, it means that you'll actually record into the track. You can record with, I'm going to use my little synthesizer today, but you can also record with your MIDI keyboard if you press this little keyboard button on the bottom here. Or actually with your mouse if you really wanted to, I guess. I don't know why that's not making any noise. Okay, cool. It doesn't matter too much because we're going to be doing this with my little synthesizer. And I recommend get some sort of very cheap options out there. Get some sort of pretty simple, basic MIDI keyboard to start out. Okay, cool. So now we're going to try and record something here. So let's hit record and we'll just drop this first track in. Cool. Yeah, it's not going to be perfect, especially I'm making this up on the fly here, so it's definitely not going to sound totally great, and there's probably going to be some things maybe slightly off the beat or something too. Cool. That's our little first track, right? Alright, next thing here, we're going to go and throw some little bird sounds in and see if we can make something that maybe kind of... Cool. That's not going to be perfect once again. And I didn't mention this earlier, but this is something I really like. Make sure that you leave, like, maybe one of these is like a little space of time to get you into the tempo. Make sure you know what you're doing with this. If you try and record right with the first, like, measure, it's really hard to... I mean, you can set up a click to start you, but I find it's easier, especially if you're recording with a drum beat as a metronome. Give yourself a little loop of it first. Okay. Alright, it's probably not perfect or even maybe necessarily very good, but yeah, we got two tracks together, we got a little bit of a song coming together here, right? Really quick little example just to show you how to use some of these things to sample with, but one thing that I think is really important once you kind of get some of your sounds together, like if you actually want something like this, especially like an odd sound like bird calls to sound good, you probably don't want to leave this like completely dry. You'll want to put in some sort of effects. We'll play around just with the built-in effects. I have a couple other options for effects, but if you haven't installed some of this stuff yourself, you probably won't. I think one thing that'll sound really nice on something like bird calls is probably throwing just a whole mess of reverb and maybe letting it kind of get a little spacey, turning that decay up a bit here. Maybe too much. Maybe we throw in, I don't know, something like some chorus in front of our reverb there, just give it a little more effect. But yeah, there you go. Kind of the most basic little version of what you can do with the TX16Wx. But there is a lot you can do with this, because you can take any sound that you can find and turn it into either an instrument or take little clips of it and chop them up into little bits and pieces. For this week, if you are one of my students, and this is an assignment I'm giving to you, see if you can make a recording using the TX16Wx and a couple of samples, okay? Feel free to leave in the stock drum beat for now. We can work later. We'll talk more about how to go in and actually maybe do some of your own little drum beat stuff and, you know, have it not be just like perfectly gridded and maybe putting some grooves and things in with it too. But for now, see if you can get something that looks sort of like this. Maybe it's 3 tracks, maybe it's 4 tracks, I don't know. But try something new and, you know, hopefully it goes all right and you get something good out of it.